Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Announcers Hour podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCall, and today we have Andrés Tejeda, who's going to bring us through kind of his career and what he's been able to do currently right now with the Rockford IceHogs, an affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks in the NHL, which is a great thing to have him drop by and also give us some knowledge for everybody included in. Can you just go ahead and, I guess, start and give us a
Sure.
little introduction on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So originally from Chicago, Illinois, got my degree in journalism at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been blessed to be doing this for 5 years. I've worked with two professional organizations on the broadcast side. I worked with the Minnesota Twins as a broadcast production intern back in 2021. This is the second time I work with a pro organization, but in a kind of different aspect. I mostly stayed in baseball, but I decided to branch out a little bit and was blessed to get an opportunity to be with the Rockford IceHogs this year as their pre-game host on AHL TV, Mixler, anywhere you can find Rockford IceHogs games. So it's been a crazy long journey. And actually, I was spending this week reflecting on 2023 and the crazy things that have happened this past year. I mean, we met through the Prospect League this year too, so it's been a wild ride, and I've been blessed to be able to be a broadcaster and call this a living.
Yeah, it's been great to watch, especially there in the Prospect League. I know I thought didn't you receive some awards with the Lumber Kings after the season?
So I was nominated with Broadcaster of the Year and the Fan Vote and the Prospect League Awards. And then the Clinton Lumber Kings as a whole won Organization of the Year under GM Ted Torno. And he actually just announced his resignation last week. So 25 years while the Lumber Kings were a minor league affiliate back with the Mariners and most recently the Marlins. Ted has run that place like it's his own kid. He's been there for a quarter of a century. And I wish him well wherever he's going, but he's definitely left some big shoes to fill for whoever's coming in next year.
Yeah, and another thing with Clinton, I thought they were, I think, first in attendance in the Prospect League, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. And a lot of people have, talked about there's a lot of different baseball leagues, but Prospect League and especially Clinton does really well. And by the way, speaking just kind of off that point, I know we'll get into your time like Rockford, but are you going to be returning as the voice of the Lumber Kings?
That has been the question. The If I had a nickel for every time I was asked that question, I'd have quite a few nickels on me. But at this point, I do not even know. I wish I could. I will say this. I would love to return to Clinton, but as you know, and many people in this industry know, the goal is always to move forward. I'm not saying that Clinton would be a hindrance at all. I loved my time there. It was the first time I was ever a voice of a team and really got to like spread my wings a little bit and kind of run things my own way. So if I do return, I would love to, but that doesn't mean that I'm not looking to keep moving forward. If anyone in Clinton's watching, I'd love to return, but I'll know more in the upcoming months, and I'll definitely be making an announcement on that at some point, whether I stay or move forward. But I loved my time in Clinton. I would love to return for another summer. It was one of the greatest summers of my life.
Well, that'll be good for you if you're able to return or wherever you go. But
Mhm.
can you also talk about kind of what you're doing with Rockford right now? It's
Sure.
obviously a big spot.
Yeah, so Rockford IceHogs, I went through that process in August. So as soon as I left the Lumber Kings and Quincy Gems series, congratulations to the organization for making it all the way to the championship. Gave us a run for our money in that first round. It was literally a game of inches. What was it? A line drive down the right field line that really made the difference for the Gems and their incredible push in the postseason. But with the Rockford IceHogs, I started my application process in August and didn't hear anything back until September. And around October, I got some news back. Talked with Mike Folta, who's the broadcaster for the Rockford IceHogs, and he offered me a position there. Told me I'd be kind of doing a lot of behind the scenes work, sideline interviews, pre-game show. There are opportunities for play-by-play, so I'll be doing some demos at some point at the BMO Center. So it's been an absolute just incredible journey at here because it's the first time where I'm working in like a hometown sort of situation. I mean, Chicago's always been home, but I have never really worked with any sort of organization outside when I was like a teenager working for the Cubs, but I was doing like like parking and security kind of a thing, nothing in broadcasting. So this is the first time I really kind of dipped my toes into the greater Chicago broadcast network, which has kind of been the goal ever since I realized I could make this sort of a career back in college. I wanted to come back to Chicago, and Rockford's been the closest I've been able to make it. And the cool thing is that we're not some affiliate for, like the Denver or the Colorado Avalanche or the Golden Knights in Vegas. Like, we're right there in Chicago. We can have our guys come up and down, so we get to talk to them, kind of seeing the behind the scenes of what reporting at this level is like, getting to work with a lot of the Blackhawks reporters. I work really well with Mike Fulta. I talk with Joe Brandt, who's a pre and post game show host for the Chicago Blackhawks. So it's really cool to kind of be in the mesh of that. And that was the goal that I set for myself, was to get closer to the Chicago media, because Chicago was one of the top broadcast markets in the United States, if not the world. And so kind of finding my way through and landing this job with Rockford was a huge push in my career.
Yeah, I bet. And you mentioned Chicago. I think it's like it goes New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Those are the three
Mhm.
biggest cities and markets. And off that point, you grew up in Chicago, I know St. Thomas is relatively close to there. So like,
Mhm.
can you just talk about how you got into sports broadcasting?
Sure. Yeah. So never really thought of myself on the mic. It was kind of like I grew up wanting to be a baseball player. I think that's how a lot of us start. We want to be into pro sports, and we realize, it's tough. It is a tough journey. And so when I transferred to St. Thomas, that was also another kind of move in my life where I was not really prepared, not prepared, but like wasn't planning for it. I just kind of happened to go to St. Thomas. That's a whole nother story for another time. But I ended up at St. Thomas. I started as um, a philosophy major, and then I switched because I started originally my college career in community college as a journalism major, and I really hated it. To be honest with you, I hated it. We did actual print newspaper at the time, and nobody really knew we existed at my community college. And the funny thing was, we were in the heart of downtown. So we were like right off of State and Lake in downtown Chicago, but no one knew that we existed. And I was the sports editor, and we didn't have any sports team. So I kind of just saw what was happening in Chicago sports and kind of reported on it. Not in a very good way. It was kind of like I'd see an article and I'd rewrite the article, kind of like a summary. And it wasn't really good for journalism's sake. It wasn't my own thoughts. It was like, here's what someone else wrote and what I thought about it. It wasn't really anything like investigative. And so I really hated it. But when I got to St. Thomas, I saw they had a really good media program. And my first year there, I was like, all right, I'm switching majors, went into it, started out with the student run media program called Tommy Media, and I started working in sports there. The other thing I wanted to do was look for work on campus. It was the first time I really lived away from home outside of Illinois, let alone Chicago. And there was a position for working in the athletic department. And I really liked sports. I was like, all right, let's work in the athletic department. Broadcast is kind of cool. Work behind the scenes, work in the control room, things like that. Never really thought about on the mic at all. And then our first game of the 2020 our 2019 season was a men's soccer game, and they were like, all right, who wants to be on the mic? And I was like, wait, this wasn't part of the job description. Like, there's only two of us. It's gonna be me or the other guy. And the other guy I worked with was a lot quieter, really not out there. And they're like, Andres, do you know soccer? I was like, I played goalie in high school. I know like how soccer's gone, like it works. So they put me on the mic, put a headset on me, and gave me a roster. And I was like, all right, let's do it. Really didn't think much of it. And I continued to do so. We had a good, decent sized crew, but no one ever wanted to be on the mic. And I was like, you know what? We're all getting paid the same. We're all hourly here. Why not? Let me have a voice. Let's go ahead, do it. I'm very, extroverted. So I was like, let's just go for it. We're getting paid. Who's really watching these games? At that point, we were Division III, and just kind of went with it. And then I realized I could really put this broadcasting thing with my journalism degree, because I'd switched majors, and I was like, all right, let's see how far it goes. Started doing that. Again, we were at D3 at the time, and then we made our transition to Division I, the first time in modern NCAA history that's happened. So we got a huge different jump, and in between that, we experienced COVID. So the games were still going once we got the okay, but nobody was in the stands. So I'm calling games with an empty arena, kind of like behind me right now in the photo. And I'm calling games, and the only people you can hear are the athletes on the court and me going crazy in the stands. But I really saw this as a true sort of like calling when I started looking for internships and jobs. And my first internship was with the Minnesota Twins radio network. And I really didn't think I'd get in. I had only one year of experience under my belt with Tommy Media, and it worked. They were like, "We like what you have. We want to see you grow. We want to help you grow." So I spent a summer in the Twin Cities and was working behind the scenes with Chris Atterbury, who's now, he just got promoted as the radio play-by-play broadcaster for the Twins, and Corey Provus, who took over for Dick Bremer, who's been the voice for the Twins for 40 years, the longest tenured broadcaster for any single team. And so getting to work with them was really cool. I wrote scripts for the radio show. I was working on cutting clips up, and I was like, okay, I really have a foot in the door here. And at a very high level with the Minnesota Twins, I was doing interviews with players on the field. I was like, okay, this is legitimate. I'm learning a lot. Let's continue going for it. We went to our transition to Division I. We got a lot more experience, a lot more legitimate equipment for real broadcast, real sort of like insider looks and like game notes. So my broadcast became a little bit more developed. And then when I left, I started working with the Frontier League, and from the Frontier League, started working in pro baseball, not like minor leagues or anything, but for the Frontier League is an independent league that is a partner with Major League Baseball. So I continue to stay in baseball. And then I found an opportunity working in Kansas and kind of just kept that ball rolling, and spent 6 months in a very small town in Kansas to work on basketball, high school basketball and high school football. And, the other part about this job is that the full-time job is looking for work. And I'm sure you know that better than anyone else, is that, knowing what to say on the air is one thing, but to get on the air is a whole nother, animal, a whole nother beast.
Yeah, it can be really discouraging. And I like that you brought up, kind of not knowing as well when you go into your first broadcast and everything. And like I can just say, especially as somebody that was more introverted, and I feel like, at Miami, I was the quietest guy in the school of
Sure. Yeah.
communication. But what's funny is like, you're thinking this isn't gonna work when you first get on. Like, I remember being horribly bad and trying to learn. So I think it's one of those things that you just gotta like throw yourself out there to the fire for the people that are worried about, kind of putting themselves out there like that. But that's more of like in everything. Because I remember going into Miami, I hadn't been on the mic yet. I wanted to do play-by-play, but I knew I was going to be nervous and terrible the first time. So that's just one interesting thing of note. And I kind of talked to a lot of people, and they say, yeah, I was nervous and not knowing what's going on the first time, but they always
Yeah.
love it afterwards. And, going back to your time with the Twins, that was something I really wanted to talk about, because not a lot
Yep.
of people get every day, even, even though you weren't the full-time play-by-play, who knows, maybe that's in the future, but
Mhm.
you were there and getting that experience and being around that major league environment every day. What was that like, and who, did you get to meet, like in terms of other
Sure.
broadcasters along the way?
Yeah, so I worked specifically with the radio crew. So I actually shared a little cubicle office on air with Chris Atterbury, the pre and post game show and in between innings host. So he really was kind of the guy who kind of gave me the inside edition of like what it's like to be a on air guy, whether he was on for 20 minutes for a 9 inning game or for an hour, because there were some days that he'd go and fill in for Corey, and some days we would just be cooped up in our little cubicle underneath Target Field and calling and watching games from there. I also had a great director and producer, Mark Janowski and Andrew Halverson, who really helped me kind of perfect my writing, perfect my reporting. Because again, this was during COVID. So we just started getting fans. We still weren't doing interviews in person until like the end of the season. So I was sitting at a desk with a computer like we're doing now and just doing Zoom interviews, talking to Josh Donaldson or Jose Barrios, Michael Pineda. Like that's how that was my experience getting interviews. So it wasn't as traditional as I would have liked it to be, and I'm sure as they would have liked for it to have been for me. But it still kind of taught me how to adapt. Here's what you have. Here are the situations. Here's what we're going to do, because regardless if there was COVID or not, the radio show is going to be the radio show. People are still going to retrieve it the same way they would. It's going to be posted on, your local radio station. It'll be on, television if you choose that, like audio preference over like a television. And it was also the broadcast that was going out throughout the ballpark. So we had to keep it going as if COVID didn't exist. I mean, obviously keeping, safety between us, wearing masks and things, but it was still, we're out there putting out our best broadcast, and here's how we're going to do it. And so my major contributions to the broadcast were pre and post game show interviews, and then during the pre-game show, doing interviews around the town. So anything that the Twins were contributing with, like community for like Play Ball America, or just like any Twins projects. I remember covering a story for a Twins, it was Harmon Killebrews, like a golf outing. So I made phone calls and just said, hey, how'd the outing go? Because I couldn't go. It was either in Fort Myers or COVID restricted only a X amount of people to go to it. So it was kind of unique doing remote like journalism as well as remote broadcasting. And on top of that, like I said, we weren't in like the booth watching the games. We were in another disclosed location where we had to do everything from the video or the broadcast that was being sent down to us, and we had to listen to what was ever being broadcasted from the guys upstairs. So it was a lot of adaptation, and having those guys really helped me kind of navigate my way through, because during that time, I was also the very kind of stay quiet, speak when spoken to. They give you an assignment, you get it done before the deadline to not only impress, but to show, hey, I can get this done. If you want to give me something or give me more responsibility, I'm ready for it, So it was definitely much more of a humbling experience as well, because when you're on the mic, you can kind of say what you like, show your kind of personality. But for me, I was like, all right, we're doing it. Everything exactly how they say it. And when you mess up, you don't want to do it, but you take the criticism, you do that, and you go off and do a better job. And having those guys who were really willing to help me and be critical of my work really kind of helped me move forward. And honestly, I don't think I'd be doing what I do now if it wasn't for that Twins job that I got during college.
Yeah, and that was it was interesting that you mentioned COVID, because that was one of those things that really put a rock in like everything,
Mm-hmm.
especially in play-by-play. I thought, it's been because I've done a couple of remote broadcasts. They're pretty difficult and
Oh
harder
yeah.
to concentrate on, and that was one place that, I always try and like, as tough as it is to get a play-by-play role, I always try to be kind of what I had on my side. When that hit, I was in community college, so I was able to just kind of, I had a lot of other stuff I was working on then, and I was able to get that done. And basically, once I got to Miami, it was kind of like opening back up, and it really worked
Mm-hmm.
out that way. But off that point, you're working with the Twins. Did you get any like, or was there any, um, I guess, moment? I know you're remote. Did you meet any of the other MLB broadcasters that came into town? Did you happen to catch them, and did they have any
Yeah.
influence?
So my first like real in-person interview, and I think they saved it for me because anyone who knows me knows I'm a diehard Cub fan, and it was the one time that the Cubs were actually coming up to Minnesota. That doesn't happen very often. And actually, at that point, the last time that the Cubs and Twins played was in 2016. So from 2016 to 2021, it's been a few years. So I happened to get that sort of sweet year where the Twins were going to Chicago, the north side at least, and then Chicago was coming up here. That was the first time I got to meet Boog Shambi, and that was his first year with the Cubs. And I remember talking to him and just was, again, the very quiet, subtle kind of thing. You don't want to speak out of turn, kind of that. But I caught him at a moment that he was free, and I just said, "Hey, Boog, like, thanks for coming. We really love listening to your broadcasts." And I forget what was said at that point, but something prompted me. He was like, "So yeah, what are your goals or aspirations?" And I told him just point blank, I was like, I want your job. Like my dream job would be, the voice of my hometown team, the Chicago Cubs. Another person I met was, I'm blanking on her name, but she's the sideline reporter for Marquee Sports Network. And she was really helpful. I asked her a lot of questions. She was very kind and like teaching me how to talk to the players, because my job at that point was to talk to the Cubs players, because that was the year that the Cubs had sold everybody. Javier Baez was gone. Chris Bryant was traded to the Giants. Anthony Rizzo was unexpectedly traded to New York. And so only guys I really talked to were Patrick Wisdom, Ian Happ, and Jason Hayward. And Hayward was the only kind of guy that was left from that World Series team. And Contreras was injured, I believe, at the time. And so talking to the sideline reporter who talks to them during the games at all points really helped me kind of navigate what my questions were, especially because I don't really get to talk and interview to even our guys because it was all on Zoom. And so for the first time getting to go on the field at Target Field and interview like the guys I watched and idolized was kind of like that fangirl moment, or you're starstruck. But having her kind of guide me before they came out or after they did their fielding and batting practice was super helpful. And so if you're ever in that position, I get like there's that like intimidation, like, oh, they're on the job. Yes, they are, but I'm sure, for myself and for anyone else who's done it, everyone wants to help you out. I've always had that sort of idea coming in that everyone has these big egos, because this is a very ego driven business. Um, but they're more than willing to help you out as long as you approach them correctly and with kindness and humility. Because at the end of the day, they are there for a job. So having those sort of like outsider insider conversations kind of can distract from that, especially if they're out there, and being out there is a privilege. So you don't want to waste their time, and you don't want to waste your time as well.
Yeah, it's a good thing to mention, especially with talking about how helpful people can be, because I can definitely say that. I mean, most of the guys have really been able to help you out, especially in the WVUM circle. We have a lot of alumni, and they're just like talking to former students or current students that are in that circle. So I would say don't be afraid to reach out if you want to, and certainly, obviously, don't like you mentioned, be ridiculously aggressive. But coming off that point, you get to past that year with the Twins, then you start doing more play-by-play with the Cal Winter League, and I believe the Frontier League, which is a partner
Mhm.
league of MLB, like you mentioned. You talk about that experience and what it was like to shift
Sure.
from the highest level of baseball to that.
Yeah. So I started out after that to the Cal Winter League, and the Cal Winter League was kind of a last minute effort. I was just looking for work in the middle of winter. Everyone told me that December, January, and February is when you're going to start seeing all those postings, and I'd never knew that the California Winter League even existed. And I didn't even start working with the Frontier League yet. So when I saw that they were looking for interns, I was like, oh, their winter season's already starting. I think I applied a week before, or a few days before they even started with pitchers and catchers reporting, or players reporting. And I just sent out my resume, and they called me back and they're like, hey, we need another broadcaster. How quick can you get to Palm Springs? They were kind enough to pay for my flight and reimburse me. And I got to meet some really good broadcasters out there. I actually worked really closely with the voice of the Clearwater Threshers, Josh Sperber, and he was my broadcast partner for that entire month. And he had a lot to share with me. He's been broadcasting everywhere. From that point, he went with the Bowling Green Hot Rods, and then went to call ball games out in Australia. So he's a great guy that I kind of happened to stumble upon. Really well mannered, really well, just like humble humility kind of guy, and always wanting to help out. And so having him kind of be my broadcast partner in that winter really kind of set more of that confidence up for me, really set up more of the making this a sustainable thing, having a guy who's been through this and tell me how it went. Because not only did we just see each other at the ballpark every day, we were also roommates. So we saw each other 24/7. We got lunch together, we got dinner together. So kind of having a guy share those things with me, who I had not even started even traveling for like this kind of stuff. It was my first time really going day in and out, calling 2 ball games every day. And so the California Winter League definitely was a big help for me in getting reps and seeing what worked, what didn't work, and kind of also rubbing shoulders with young guys who want to make it to the pros, kind of seeing what their sort of tactics are like, what they do every day to warm up, and kind of getting an insider edition of like, hey, here's how the game of baseball is played at the field level. Like everyone knows, get throw strikes, get hits, things like that. Three up, 3 down, you're out. But the other sorts of things, like how does the third baseman really think about playing third base? What is a catcher really thinking about? So talking to those guys too, because they want to get to that next level too. And then having coaches that the Cal Winter League brings in, who are retired major league coaches or minor league coaches, guys who work in independent baseball every single year. We had scouts come down, and actually my first year we had a guy get drafted, or not drafted, but scouted by the Chicago Cubs. So talking to the scouts there was really helpful, really helped me see the game of baseball in a different light as well.
Yeah, that's a good thing to mention, because one other thing I wanted to ask you, you see a lot of these players develop, and this is the same thing in the Prospect League. They have actually some really famous alumni. I think they've had, it's close to, I want to say 200 players like end up getting drafted eventually in
Mhm.
MLB. So there's a lot of post success. Is there anyone, especially now it's been a couple of years that those players have had time to move on? Is there any like one player you knew was really special and is now like killing it and getting to the next stage?
Not at this point because I think I'm also super young into this. And that's not a word I use to describe myself a lot young. I'm 26, but I've been in this industry for 5 years and I've been able to follow a few careers. I think the biggest name we've really had, that I've at least worked in an industry or worked for an organization that had a big name was when I worked in the Frontier League in 2022 when Kumar came out and signed with the Tri-City Valley Cats, and working with that, having him be the number 3 pick of the 2022 draft was insane. And at that point, I was working for the front office as a beat reporter, so my emails were blowing up, my phone was blowing up, had to make graphics, a whole bunch of stuff. As of right now, he's currently in that minor league system. He hasn't really seen any like major league time, but he's one of the big names. Last year, we had 2 guys get drafted from the Clinton Lumber Kings. We had a guy actually on our team last year get drafted by the Nationals, and now he's with the Fredericksburg Nationals. And so kind of seeing these guys go through like that sort of dream, getting your name called at the draft was really cool to experience a lot, like just as an what's the word I want to use here? As a person who kind of gets to see behind the scenes, because you hear of all these guys who get drafted like, oh, congratulations, make a tweet, whatever, but actually getting to talk to those guys and kind of get the raw emotion, raw you know, inside scoop was something that was really cool to me. I've because I wanted to be that at one point. I wanted to be the ball player, I wanted to be the one getting drafted or had my name called up in lights and stuff like that, but kind of being able to live vicariously through those guys because I just worked with them and see them play every day, it was really cool.
Yeah, I bet. I think that's what I'm kind of looking forward to if I'm one day hopefully get obviously play by play and everything's going well later on. Be like, oh, I remember that one guy that
Mm-hmm.
was getting talked about all the time because I saw him when there was less eyes on him in
Yep.
that development stage. I think that's the coolest part about working in that
Mm-hmm.
level of baseball and to get to see that. But going back to just kind of your experience at that level, can you talk about, I guess, the day to day being like, the voice of the Lumber Kings or
Yeah.
in the Winter League and how, like, what's the process like for you specifically when you get to the ballpark and
Mm-hmm.
all the way through leaving?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Winter League because I think that one was a little bit more rigorous than it was in Clinton, if you can believe it. Because again, you're there for an entire month, and your only off day is the Super Bowl, and then playoffs hit. And you're calling 2 games a day. You have 2 games at the main stadium, and then you have 2 games at like a location behind historic Palm Springs Stadium. So we would get up at like 6 in the morning, get on the bus, get there at 7. Game start at 9 o'clock, and you're getting rosters from the coaches. We had a little locker room and then a little office space, and so you'd go to the coaches. Hey, what's your starting 9? Who's good? Who's not? Um, who's injured? Who's whatever? And then you kind of just have to go off of that. There's no computer system. There's no whatever. You have to build your own sort of database. You have to keep your own stats. You have to do whatever, because we use Point Streak, but just to log the games. It was really hard to kind of get those insider scoops. And so what I ended up doing was creating an entire season on the Game Changer app. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah,
And so
we
I
did use
used
that in high
that.
school.
Oh yeah. So I used the Game Changer app and I spent an entire night just putting 400 guys in there and looking back at other games and putting in the stats and the line scores, and even like pitch by pitch into my phone so that I could get those deeper stats that I like to talk about. Because when I do broadcasts, I definitely like adding analytics into it. I know a lot of people don't want to hear analytics, but I think with how the game is being played now and talking about the guys when they're on the field or off the field, those definitely play a big factor in like what kind of predictions you can make or what the storyline is, what is exactly that they were working on, and what can we expect to see from that work that they did off the field on the field in the next game. So at the Cal Winter League, we would go there, have games, 7 inning games, from 10 a.m. to about 1. You'd get lunch from 1 to 1:30, and then 2 o'clock, another game happened. And then after that, you write recaps for all the games that happened. My second year with the Cal Winter League last year, I was a sideline reporter. So I had to get notes from every game and then pick one player, do a quick interview, and try to find a way to get a synopsis of the entire day and put it online. So I was doing a little bit more video editing and reporting rather than play-by-play. And then on some days we'd also have PA announcing. So I would do PA announcing gigs, making sure I get everyone's name right. And it's wild. I'm really bad with names. I'm better with faces, but the amount of times that like, oh yeah, so-and-so's playing today. Oh, cool. Let's make sure we get their name right, because a lot of their families would come watch. And then on top of that, when you have guys getting signed, you have to also keep it hush because you don't want to share any information with any of the other players or let them know who's in the stands. You don't want to kind of build that ego on them, like, oh, so-and-so's coming today, so we got to play better. Like, no, just play how you usually play. So it was kind of a microcosm of everything I've been able to do now, but at a more concentrated level, if that makes sense, at least at the California Winter League. While at the Clinton Lumber Kings, we had a lot better organized database through Presto Sports that everyone was able to use. You could look up stats a lot easier. You could filter them. So making game notes was really simple outside of like designing it and things like that. Talking to the players was a lot easier because you see them every day, as opposed to where at the Cal Winter League, you see them for a few hours a game and then they're gone. They have to go work out, they rest. While at least for the Lumber Kings, we're one of the few teams where they sent me to every road game, so I was traveling with the team on the bus, sharing hotels with the guys. We'd go out to get dinner. So, you want to try to be personable, and you don't always want to talk their ear off on baseball. And it's great when you can, but at the end of the day, they're a different person. So trying to figure out the sort of personal side to the ball player and then adding that into your broadcast too, because that brings a lot, another level into it, especially when like a guy that I love talking about from the Lumber Kings, Connor Giusti, he's from Hoffman Estates, Illinois, and we would always joke. He's like, "Oh, I'm from Chicago." I'm like, "Hoffman Estates is not Chicago." As a guy from Chicago, we would joke around about that. And then he's telling me about, I want to go play here, and now he's playing at Valpo, so he comes closer to play at UIC because now they're in the Missouri Valley Conference. So getting to watch him go from Lumber Kings to now play D1 baseball from Division, I believe 2 it was. So like when he comes to Chicago, I'm going to go see him, talk about him. I don't know if he's coming back to the Lumber Kings. But if I do get to see him again, I can talk about the previous year, the things we talked about in the locker room, things we talked about at dinner, kind of a whole bunch of cool little, as I like to call them, like seasonings into the broadcast, brings a new flavor. So with the Lumber Kings, it was a lot more personable. I really got to get more in depth with the guys because you're spending 2 months with them. You're going to get a lot of stories, a lot of insight. And that's what makes the broadcast a lot better, at least in my opinion.
That sounds good. And by the way, I'm now running with the time issue, but
Sure. Yeah.
if in like 5 minutes, I'll probably send a new link and we can finish out there. But going off
Sure.
that point about play by play and get to know the guys, analytics has been that hot topic in baseball. I always try to ask baseball play by play announcers that. And I personally,
Mm.
I think it's really useful. The whole kind of idea too is like use the past stats to predict the future. And I think baseball, when you get the largest sample size, so you get the
Oh
most
yeah.
accurate prediction as opposed to like football. I mean, trying to predict some of the stuff, like it's just useless, like the NFL, for example, because the season's so short,
Sure.
not
Yeah.
enough sample size, and it's hard to dissect drive level data. But at baseball, I mean, have you talked with other broadcasters about that? How much do you try to fill in about like analytics and
Mhm.
storytelling, like for example, in the booth?
Yeah, so this past season we used Rapsodo to kind of give us like those spin rates, things like that. And while I love all those things, the things that I care more about is like the execution. So I don't care how fast the ball's coming out, things like that. And I think that's something I've realized from other broadcasters too is yeah, it's cool to see like how fast the ball's coming, how much break it brings, but at the end of the day, what does that pitch produce? Is a pitch going to produce more so of a ground ball type? Is it going to give a line drive? Where are guys hitting them more consistently? What does a guy like to hit more, and where does he hit it, and how does the field play it that way? And I think, especially in baseball and the other broadcasters I've talked to, they tried to, as I said earlier, sprinkle in that analytic stuff for like added extra flavor. You talk about a guy who's probably on a hot streak. He's on a 6-game hitting streak. No one cares what kind of pitch he hit it off of, but if you know that the guys who's pitching likes to throw in, a slider, an inside slider, and the guy who's on the hitting streak likes pulling sliders down the left field line, you have a better probability that that 6-game hitting streak is going to turn into a week-long hitting streak, but you don't announce that. You kind of have it in the back of your mind and you throw it in there when it's available. So maybe that guy's sitting fifth in the lineup and you're seeing the starter throw a lot of sliders. You can mention as he's coming up, hey, he's been hitting the slider really well. Guys working with the slider. Is the pitcher aware of this? What kind of game plan is he going to go with? And will the batter wait for a slider that's inside and rip it down the left field line, So that's kind of like how I've been going about it and how I've seen other broadcasters use it. It's a good crutch to have. And I don't know if crutch is even the right word, but kind of a nice little additive to your storytelling too when you're talking about a guy and how well he's been doing.
I would say also with the storytelling, there's a lot of stories that kind of go unnoticed, especially
Mhm.
with either in Rockford or Clinton or wherever you're at. In player stories that get really interesting. I had a chance to do some of that because I was also working, like, I mean, not only for the broadcast, but display it to like the public because I was
Yeah.
working with WGM in Quincy. So I
Mhm.
put some packages together for the gems. I mean, who's been you have like a favorite story from a guy
Mhm.
that's been really inspirational from one of the players at any stop you've been at?
Sure. Currently right now with the Lumber King, or excuse me, the Rockford IceHogs, obviously the story for the entire organization has been Connor Bedard, obviously. And now he's got the fractured jaw out for 6 to 8 weeks. And the Blackhawks struggled a lot last year, and they're struggling this year as well. And so working at the sort of like farm system, immediate farm system to the Chicago Blackhawks, you kind of get to see a unique side of sports because when you're working at a prospect league team, you're not getting guys coming in and out or at least filling in for injuries. These are the guys you're stuck with. These are the guys who are going to be here forever, healthy or unhealthy, and you got to go with it. At the Rockford IceHogs, however, we have a minor league affiliate in Indiana called the Indy Fuel. Then you got the Rockford IceHogs and you got the Chicago Blackhawks. And so a lot of the guys that we started the season off with are now with the Blackhawks, like Joey Anderson. Brett Seeney's been up and down. Isaac Phillips has been up and down. We just announced our All-Star yesterday, with Ethan Del Mastro. He's a rookie, played with Connor Bedard in the juniors in the championship with Team Canada last year. So there's not necessarily one specific guy, but kind of just the entire culmination of hockey within the organization, especially with what the Blackhawks are trying to do, going back to that dynasty from the 2010s. They're trying to get those guys from the World Juniors who've won play together to are working really, really well at any of the levels, and three, developing at this level of the AHL. Because right now, the Ice Hogs, when the Blackhawks were taking our guys left and right, not taking and like stealing or anything, but needing our guys, we went on a 7-game skid and we were like, what's going to happen? Who can we call up? Who can we even go to in Indy that's going to be able to play at our caliber? And so that was a really tough, like 2-3 weeks. We play only on the weekends where the Ice Hogs were losing every single day. And now that the Blackhawks have become a little bit more healthy, Joey Anderson's off the IR. David Gust has been absolutely incredible. He's a forward for the Ice Hogs. He's been kind of like that hometown hero kind of thing because he's from Orland Park, Illinois. It's nice to kind of see those stories kind of all culminate together because a lot of the guys at the Blackhawks are very young, and the Ice Hogs are also super, super young. We have like, I believe 6 or 7 rookies, and a lot of them are starters. We got the first round draft pick from last year, Nolan Allen, who's working on the D line. Again, as I mentioned, Del Mastro, who just got picked up to the All-Star game in San Jose, who's been absolutely killing it. He's our top producer at the defensive line on the blue line. And then you're seeing these guys at the national hockey level, like Connor Bedard, who 18 years old. Like I remember I was 18. I was like, I'm trying to figure out how to even go to college, wasn't even thinking of a career. And this guy's playing for just under $1 million with the salary cap with the Blackhawks. But how do we find a fill for him? Because at this point, for Blackhawks fans, you're only watching to see this kid skate every day because the Hawks aren't winning. And then when they do win, it's like, wow, they managed to pull it out, and not trying to speak badly of the organization because they're doing great moves, especially with the Rockford IceHogs, but seeing how these guys continue to develop and then are challenged at the NHL level and find a way to produce, find a way to help out. And yeah, it might not be contributing to wins, but to just see them play on the defensive line or on the forward line well, and then come back down to the IceHogs, it makes for a fun season.
Yeah, I bet it is, and it's cool to watch like um, from the outside perspective, are an interesting thing when you're a play-by-play guy for a minor league team. See, I don't know how that works yet because you mentioned the prospect. I haven't been there, but I'm wondering, because I guess you get some sort of inside scoop. What is that process like for a guy that's gets called up? Have you seen any of that personal action? Because those are some of
Mhm.
the, I've heard stories like, baseball stories, for example, of guys that get caught in the minor leagues and just the grind
Yeah.
of that and the long bus rides and years of waiting to try and get that next step.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there any great stories that, you remember or you can even, I guess,
Mhm.
share if they're not too like personal about
Yeah.
guys getting called up and down?
Yeah, so one guy that like comes to mind that I believe has been, I wouldn't say grinding year after year, because he's a great player. Now he's actually getting a shot with the Blackhawks this year. He's been in the minor leagues for about 4 years, at least with us. Isaac Phillips, a great defenseman. He missed the opening day starting cut, or he was cut on the opening day lines to Kevin Korchinski. But Korchinski is just as good. And so Isaac Phillips started the year with us here in Rockford. And as soon as the guy started getting injured, he was the first guy out from Rockford going down I-90 to Chicago. And he's been producing super well. He came down one time for one game and then went straight back up. So seeing those guys grind out and talking to them, I remember the one interview I asked Isaac Phillips. It was my first like couple of days there, and they asked me to do intermission interviews. Like, can you just remind me how long you've been here? It's like 4 years. It's like, you've been here for 4 years at hockey. Like that's really cool. Like you're a regular, like a Rockford regular. And now he's at with the Chicago Blackhawks. And when I'm watching the Blackhawks games at home, I'm like, oh my gosh, like look, there's Isaac Phillips. There's Isaac Phillips. He's playing the D line, and you hear the broadcaster Chris Vosters for the Blackhawks call his name. It's like, I talked to that dude. Like it's so cool. It's a really cool story, and for him especially because he puts in work every day. The few times I've been able to see him on the ice during morning skate, he's the first guy there, last guy off, and he's always helping those guys out. And then on top of that, we had a rookie, Louis Crevier, 6'8", absolute unit of a guy. He got called up for his first NHL debut this year, and I'm sure pairing up with Isaac Phillips on the D line, having a guy that you've been working with for about a few months at the minor league level, and then having a guy kind of take you under his wing, because Phillips has been up and down for the past couple of years, but I'm sure that helps out guys like Louis Crevier who are like, I'm here for my first time. He hasn't had his first pro goal, but he's been on the assists really well. How do I work better? How do I play the D line better? Especially when you're going up against, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who they played yesterday. They played the Islanders yesterday with Connor McDavid. Like that's a franchise NHL like household name. Like I can't imagine going up against a guy like that. But yeah, I think Isaac Phillips was like the first guy that comes to mind. I would also say David Gus. He's the hometown kid from Orland Park. He actually played with the Chicago Wolves when they were affiliated with the Hurricane. They no longer have an affiliation, but even won a Calder Cup with them. And so kind of getting to see him stay in Illinois after being traded from down in Rosemont, right down I-90, coming all the way out west to Rockford. It's kind of cool for him to kind of show, hey, I'm still here, I'm still working. And obviously his goal is to get at the NHL level. So it's kind of cool seeing guys that grew up in my area, because he and I actually went to school, I think 2 or 3 blocks away from each other, which I had no idea. I went to school on like Pulaski out here, and he was just down the street a few years ahead of me. So kind of catching up with him and telling him like, oh yeah, we used to go to that same burger joint when we were teenagers. It was really cool.
Yeah, and I think I like that you mentioned kind of how those players getting their shot. I think that's great recognition. I'm also wondering kind of off that point in sports in general. I guess less on the play-by-play side necessarily, but have you seen kind of the reverse way of that where a player comes down and on a rehab assignment? And well,
Mm-hmm.
firstly, does that happen in hockey? And I think secondly,
Mm-hmm.
how do the guys react? Because I saw like, for example, when am I thinking of Fernando Tatis came down
Mm-hmm.
to the El Paso Chihuahuas, I think, for a couple of games and their minor league system, that was a huge deal. He hit a home run and obviously gets the fans excited. Same with when
Yeah.
Yadier Molina used to go down.
Yeah.
Sometimes for the Cardinals, it's like a big deal. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. So have you seen that yet with Rockford, and how do players react?
So we only have had that once. I'm thinking Boris Kachuk. He came down. He was put on waivers from the Blackhawks, and Rockford picked him up immediately. We needed more help at the D line. We were going through that 7-game losing streak. And Kachuk actually, he he handled it with a lot of grace because he's been at the NHL level for a long time. And it was really cool to see him coming out of the tunnel. It was something I noticed immediately. He lets those guys go first. He's the last guy to hit the ice because he knows that, hey, this is their time, this is their stuff, and he's always there. They'll announce his name in like a starting lineup, and he won't go out. He'll go out after the first four have gone, and then he'll go, which I thought was kind of cool to say, like, hey, I'm here for my work, but this is for you guys. Like you guys are here working. I'm here to just add that extra help. And of course, you got the Blackhawks fans, Blackhawks faithful, excuse me, they come down to Rockford and they love seeing those guys up close and personal. I mean, the BMO, what you see behind me, is a lot smaller than the UC, so you see all the Kachuk fans come out, and when he scores a goal, they go crazy. But I never really got to talk to Boris Kachuk too much, or at all, actually, if I'm being completely honest, but just kind of seeing the way that he kind of carried himself around the players, and then talking to the players in the intermission interviews, asking them, hey, how helpful has it been to have a guy like Boris come down, especially when the team's struggling? What kind of role has he played? While he doesn't look like it, he's been very much of a leadership role. He's been telling the guys on the D line, hey, let's work it this way. Let's stay closer to the puck. Let's keep cleaner passes, keep them short. It's cool to have a veteran come down. I'm sure, it's not the best thing in the world for the veteran, but, make the most of it, share your wisdom, help those guys get up to where you're at, and kind of using that, kind of like spreading the wealth, if you will, so that's the one incident I can think of where a guy who's been a regular in the NHL has come down. Cause again, like I said, Rockford, we send guys up and back down. So they're not regulars per se. But Boris Kachuk is the guy that I just, one guy that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's a great point because that's always an interesting scenario in sports. And bouncing off that, kind of flipping it a little bit, you've announced baseball. I think you've done, every sport pretty much or a lot of them, obviously, you dip your toe into. Just how hard, because I haven't done it yet, is
Sure.
hockey to announce, and is it the hardest, or could you rank the sports?
Sure. Yeah, hockey, while I will say is the hardest, I'm blessed. I don't have to do play by play as often. Like, I have not called a Rockford IceHogs game yet. Mike Folta does that. But he'll have me record demos coming soon. So maybe I'll put something out later and I'll share it with you and ask for your critiques. But I called hockey at the D3 and D1 level at St. Thomas. And my gosh, is that a completely different animal? One, all my knowledge on hockey at that point came from playing NHL on my PlayStation. So kind of trying to find a way to make that work. And then on top of that, names in hockey are extremely unique. Like you get vowels and consonants that are different, that are put together, and you're like, how does a CKT sound make a like a ch sound? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. On top of that, the puck moves very quickly in college and in minor and major league hockey. So making sure that you're calling it, because at that point, I kind of only knew baseball broadcasting. It was like, you call where the ball is. You always start with where the ball's at. And it's hard to do that in hockey because the puck's always moving. The ball in baseball is usually in the pitcher's hand, off the bat, and somewhere in the field. Mostly foul, if we're being completely honest. But I would definitely say hockey is one of the more difficult sports to broadcast. And a little story from that: my second year calling hockey at the Division III level at St. Thomas, we had an impromptu game where they're like, "Hey, if you want to make some extra money, we have a game that's not scheduled, but come on down. We'll have you call it. We're gonna have a team come in. They had a layover and they want to play us." I was like, okay, cool. Who is it? It's the 18U girls Chinese team. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay. There's got to be some information on them that I can use. So I bring my laptop, bring it down to the rink, and I ask for a roster. Of course, there's no roster. I'm like, all right, let's go online. You go online, and the website is in Mandarin, and Google Translate is not translating anything, any of the characters. So you only see numbers, and you're like, okay, check their jerseys. They got to have something on the jersey. Worst case scenario, they don't have anything. And, they did have names on their jersey, but they were in Mandarin. So we have no idea who these girls are on the ice playing St. Thomas. And I'm like, all right, this is going to be the craziest broadcast I've ever done. Because believe it or not, women's hockey is, if not just as fast as men's hockey. It's just as passionate. I know the PWHL just started a week or two ago, and that's been getting a lot of praise. But calling women's ice hockey, especially that day, was so difficult because you don't have names, you don't have lines, at least for the road team. So you're really playing the hometown favorite, which is something you don't always want to do on a broadcast. You want to keep it neutral, but obviously, like for those big plays, you add the little inflections, you add more of that yelling or more of the celebratory thing. So that was a very much pro St. Thomas game, so adding to the already difficulty of calling a regular hockey game, but not knowing the entirety of one team that just happened to be in town for a night, it was definitely difficult. After that, I would say for me, football has been very difficult. I was able to call football when I was in Kansas. I called high school football, and that is very different than pro football because I would watch a lot of pro football to kind of prepare myself and talk to other guys who knew what they, knew a lot more about football than I did. And so when I was calling out in Colby, we were on the road, and there's one football team that didn't use a quarterback. They ran every single play. And for me, I had no idea that was going to be the play. And I'm like, all right, they snap it to the quarter running. Okay. Who has the ball? Like, what's the position, And they're running the ball every single play. You're hoping that maybe they throw a ball because they would line up just huddled up and they just push one unit. And for me, watching pro football, you never see that anymore. You never see guys huddling up and running. If it's a running play, it's more in the backfield. It was a snap and a run. So it was very difficult for me, at least. So I don't know if I would my ranking would be very common to anyone else because I never really grew up with football. After that, I would say soccer is difficult. Not that it's a difficult sport. It's just difficult to fill time because it's such a large field in comparison to the action. There's 11 people on each side, including a goaltender, and the ball's moving back and forth mostly in the middle. And so the best way that I was told to call soccer is when the ball's in the middle, that's when you tell your stories. When the ball's on either end, you can add a little bit more excitement. You can talk about the plays and passes, things like that. But most of the time, most of those passes and plays will find another leg and go the other way. So kind of timing that out is difficult. So I would put hockey in more so as you need to know what's going on, know where the puck's at. Football, because I didn't really know too much. And then soccer, because it's a delicate balance of what you're saying, when to say it and how to say it, because soccer's just a very different game than I would say most professional sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talked about kind of hockey, see, that would be the only thing that scared me with hockey is yet I want to get into it, because I thought
Mm-hmm.
especially I like I can't say I followed the NHL as a whole particularly
Mm-hmm.
close as compared to the other sports, but I thought it's interesting, and I did like watching the Blues when they had that cup run. So I think it would
Oh
be
yeah.
interesting to get into. But football I think hockey, I can see that being the toughest. Football, it's got that difficulty because
Mm-hmm.
the angles that you have to look at when you're in the broadcast booth in football, like at
Oh
Hard Rock
yeah.
Stadium, you are on the side here. You
Yeah.
look at the bowl and you think, well, you guys are the college broadcasters. Surely they'd have a better spot when you're in the if you're getting paid to do it. And I don't know. I mean, because
Yeah.
the TV, they are in the middle. But Joe
Yeah.
Zagacki is the longtime voice of Hurricanes. He's like 20 feet away from me when I'm broadcasting. So
Yeah.
you got to be having the binoculars and really
Oh my
understand
gosh.
the
Yeah.
direction. And that's when it gets messed up too, because if it's like you're doing that angle, that side angle on one end, it kind of screws up your understanding of right and left. Because if you
Yeah.
think about it, like if a player's on the right, like when you're calling on, let's say you're to the side, like on that diagonal angle,
Yeah.
and they are on the opposite side would be the right for the offense as they push into the front court, and it would pass it to the left, which is your right now. So it's
Yeah.
all messed up if you think about it, but you
Yeah.
just try to keep up with it. I mean, and by the way, do you have what was the moment, I guess, for you coming back to just when you first started? Like, did
Mhm.
you ever think you wanted to be an announcer? Was it right after you called that first game at St. Thomas, or how did that
Mhm.
work for you when you really knew you wanted to get into it long term?
I think it was a culmination of events that really kind of solidified. It was no like moment, like a eureka moment where it's like, yep, this is what I meant to do. It was kind of things were falling into place. I was passionate enough to continue to see where the road would lead. And as I continued to kind of like push the brush away and the path became more clear, it was like, okay, this is where I need to be. It's funny that you mentioned that, that first soccer game, because I called my first game on ESPN in 2023, and it was UIC against St. Thomas in Chicago. So it was kind of that full circle moment where I'm thinking of myself back in 2019 calling Division III men's soccer, and then my first game on ESPN is calling Division I St. Thomas soccer in my hometown. So that was kind of that like full circle moment for me. But I think it was after my internship with the Minnesota Twins where I was like, okay, I can do this. It's a unique experience to work in professional sports, especially if you're working NFL, MLB, even NBA, because those are like the top three, United States sports. Hockey's making that slow come up, and I would even argue MLS is making a slow come up as well as becoming a franchise or a staple of American sports. But working there was kind of like, okay, I can fit in here. I know the work ethic, and now I've been given the tools. Now I got to make my path with it. I got to lay down the foundation. I got to put out, the roadmap. I got to see what's available. And as we said at the top of the podcast, finding the job or applying for jobs is a full-time job. That's part of making your path. That's part of doing the research, part of what fits well. For me, I'm in a long committed relationship with my girlfriend. So when I'm applying for jobs, I got to be like, hey, honey, like, what does Ohio look like for you? What is Virginia? Like, is that somewhere you want to go? And luckily for her, like she works for a big company in sales, so she can move around a little bit. But always the first thing I do when I see an opening for broadcast, like, all right, let's see, is her company out there? How long is it going to be? What's travel time? Things like that. Because as much as I wish it could be like, hey, get up, pack your bags, let's go, which is what I've been doing for so long. I mean, in college, I went from Chicago to Minnesota. I went to 4 different schools to get a degree. It took me 5, 6, or 5.5 years to get it. But now it's like, all right, you're an adult, you got things to worry about. And that adds on to the pressure, adds on to the sort of responsibilities. What is it that you can do? What are you willing to take? And at that point, to that point, you should be willing to take anything. You don't feel that you're too big or too proud to take some low, hockey college job. Like this weekend, I'm calling club hockey for 14U. It's so much fun to call hockey. Once you're in it, I don't care who I'm calling. Like, it's fun. It's reps. It helps me build a better broadcast. And then for the parents who are watching it, they get a high level, and then people start talking about, oh, who is this guy who's calling it? What company were they working for? Who's whatever. Then you start getting more requests to call games. And it doesn't matter if you're at the NHL level, AHL, or some pond hockey, every opportunity, call it like it's the biggest game you're doing. That's the best advice I've ever received. Outside of I was part of a cohort with pre and post game show host Rich Hollenberg, and he always told me count the wins and embrace the grind. And embracing the grind has been probably the one thing I feel on a daily basis is, yeah, I got a job with Rockford right now, but now I'm looking, okay, what's summer going to look like? What's spring looking like? I've been able to work with UIC and work for their ESPN broadcast crew, but it's like, hey, I'm working on like cameras and directing and replays. When I get a chance to do play-by-play, I better be ready, because I want them to see, hey, we can rely on this guy to fill in, but also we want him to be, somebody that we can go and call for and set it on the schedule all the time. So making the most of your opportunities is also part of like building that roadmap, because I think it's the analogy of like a roadmap is like you start from point A to get to point B, whatever, but you're going to have to go up and down that roadmap at some point in order to continue to build avenues and highways to other places. And so, like I said, I've been blessed to work in Iowa, Illinois, Kansas. I've worked a little bit in Denver too, California. Like, my roadmap is going all across the United States, and I'm sure that I'll be going back to a couple of these places again. And Rockford's just another place on my roadmap that I've been able to cultivate a path to. And I'd love to come back if, this works out and I get to do pro hockey. I'd love to come back and call a game for Rockford if I can. But yeah, it was never a specific moment for me where it's like, this is what I'm going to do. It was, I made the right choices. I got the best advice I could, and I used the tools that were given to me to build that path.
Yeah, that's a really good really good knowledge, I think, and a good advice for anybody in anything, especially. But if you're in a competitive field like play by play, take those opportunities and don't take them for granted
Yeah.
because you just want to get linked in and be able to do a good job and build that tape. And that was the thing that's what's most exciting for me is I'm in that kind of position where I'm searching and have a couple of things out and interviews going, but I'm literally ready to go anywhere. And I think that's where
Exactly.
the passion is and excited about it. But I that's something that's good. But one of the great questions I like to ask, I guess,
Sure.
because again, the play-by-play guys, they get so many games, they go to different leagues, so they've seen some stuff. I remember because I think I'm differently. I've been on some crazy games, and
Sure.
it started bigger than I thought I could even comprehend too, because I've done only so many football games. Those have all been the D1 ACC Miami Hurricanes games, and I
Sure. Yeah.
the finishes have been stunning on some of
Yeah.
the games that I get put on. I've joked with our current sports director. Well, I just graduated, but still the current sports director of WVOM, Nick Marino. I'm like, Nick, I think when you put me on this game, because we were calling the FIU Miami game, they won. This was men's basketball, but it didn't look like it for a while. And I'm like, I think when you put me on this game, you kind of cursed it because that's been my joke is like I've been on some bad Miami losses, some crazy wins,
Sure. Yeah.
but just crazy games. And I can remember personally when Matthew Cleveland was on the call and announced his game-winning buzzer beater to beat Miami as their only home loss of that Final Four season. I was not on play-by-play, but I was on color, and that was a
Oh yeah.
great for the Georgia Tech Miami football game, and they
Yeah. Yeah.
came back on some merry drive, and I can remember I really said to my broadcast partner is Jay Monty with me. I said, you know what? He's down. This is not a fumble. They're still going to roll the fumble because that was exactly you can see it, the nightmare coming,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that did. So I'm wondering. I mean, those are some great stories and things to look back on. What has been your
Mhm.
craziest top moments like on the
Oh
mic?
boy. This year, um, New Year's Eve, 2023, very recent. The Ice Hogs and Admirals for the last 4 games have gone into overtime every single meeting. This is their 5th meeting. The Ice Hogs are up, I think, 2-1 in the second period. Admirals tie it 2-2. Then the Ice Hogs find a way to score 3-2. And we go into the third period. So we're leading 3-2, 8 minutes left. Admirals find a way to tie it 3-3. There's 4 minutes left, and I'm looking at one of the girls I work with. She kind of helps me with cutting up replays and stuff and making highlight reels. And I'm joking, like, how are you feeling about like overtime? Like, let's go again. Let's make it 5 in a row. And she's like, please, for the love of everything, like, I can't do another overtime. And mind you, this is like the common theme against the Admirals and Hogs this year. And I think it's like 2-3 minutes left. There's a breakaway pass to David Gus. And again, he's the hometown kid. Everyone loves him. He's from Orland Park. So game's on his stick, comes up, sends an absolute snipe shot over one of the top goalies in the league, makes it 4-3, and we go home. And of course, the joke is like, oh, fireworks on the ice, fireworks tonight. But that was probably like the most like playoff game I've ever felt. We had a sold out arena at the BMO, and just the electricity was insane. And one of the perks of my job is when we do win, where you have the 3 stars at the end of the game, I get to interview the number 1 star. Now, David Gust scored when we were in San Diego against the San Diego Gulls. It was the game right before Christmas, and he did the same thing, but in overtime. So we're calling him the holiday hero. And so it just kind of felt perfect to kind of mention it to him, like, hey, how cool does it feel to be the hero for the holidays? Like, it seems like you got somewhere to be at for all these games that are right before the holidays. And, he's like, it's always fun being the hero. So just talking to the guys is super incredible. But when you have a moment, kind of asking him personally, like, what did that feel like? Because I'll never be able to get to do that. The fans here will never be able to do that. People watching at home will never be able to do that. What is that experience like? Because you're probably the only person in the world right now who's on this high, And I think for me, those are the cool moments. Those are the incredible moments. This past year in the Prospect League, game 1 of the Great River Division Championship against the Gems. It was the first and only time I've ever done this in my career. I predicted a home run. The Gems were up 2-1. We had guys on second and third, and Jeremy Figueroa is at the plate, and he came in late in the season. He's got 3 home runs and I think like 10 games. And I'm like, this kid can hit. He gets a good, if he's going to get a good pitch to hit, he's going to send it for a ride. And I said that right before the pitch came in, and he smacks a pitch right over the right field wall. And I remember absolutely losing my mind on the broadcast. I think it's on my Twitter too, but I always put headphone warning because I was going absolutely nuts. We have a siren that goes off at Nelson Corp Field too whenever a home run is hit. And I just remember getting really lightheaded after that call because it was like, I mean, the Gems, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but he was like hitting 400 for you guys. He hit a home run to start off the game against us that day too. And so Nelson Court Field is like dull. It's not the ballpark, but just like the feeling at the moment. It's like, oh my gosh, like, are we really going to lose this game? It's already really tough. We're in the middle of the day because we started that game at 2 p.m. because it was a Sunday. And then Jeremy Figueroa sends an absolute shot to left field, and that felt like playoffs to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, losing my mind. Unfortunately, we were unable to beat the Gems, but I mean, you guys were the better team that day. But I mean, those are the moments that you live for, just having, being a part of something larger than yourself, because I live vicariously through the athletes that I call. Like, I want to be the guy hitting the home run to give the lead. I want to be the guy scoring the game-winning goal. I'll never be that guy, unfortunately. But if I can add a voice to the moment, that I think is like the most fulfilling part of this job. You get to do it. You get to watch these games for free. As a matter of fact, you get paid to do it. Like, it's you're on cloud 9 at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point because I've had a few moments too where I've just been you just get crazy to think about being a part of it. So I've
Yeah.
seen like and it's just different as a fan because I've been in some crazy
Mhm.
games as a fan. Like I went to the last Super Bowl run for Brady in New England. They played the
Yeah.
AFC Championship game in Kansas City. I went to go see that. It was a crazy overtime game, and that was
Yeah.
like I remember walking out thinking that was wild, but I think being on the call for some of those football wins, the
Oh yeah.
basketball buzzer beater, even though that was on the other side of the Canes there, those moments have stuck with me, I think, more. And so it's really different when you're on the call and announcing that. And I can speak on the Gems, like especially as my last baseball broadcast. I really enjoyed even just being there for those bigger games, like the
Yeah.
when they played the Prospect League Championship Series. Game 1 was in Quincy, so I got to announce that, and they were just
Yeah.
hitting bombs left and right. But
Oh yeah, that was a good game. I remember watching that game. That was fun.
yeah. Crazy part too is though you mentioned tipping home run. Somehow I've done that like, and I didn't even realize I've done that like several times on
Yeah,
Miami's baseball. Now I think it's a little easier because they were known as like the Cane Crushers of the Miami
sure. Yeah,
Bombers because they just hit dingers. But
yeah,
literally, I remember I tipped a Yo-Yo Morales home run, I think once or
yeah. Mhm.
twice, and I remember doing so. I think it was I want to say like Carlos Perez or someone else, but there's been those fun moments that are really cool is when you
Mhm.
actually predict it and look like the smartest guy.
Yeah,
You
and that
never
goes
know.
back to the whole analytics thing. Like with the Jeremy Figueroa home run, like I just knew if he gets a good pitch, he can send it. He's a small guy, reminds me of Jose Altuve, but he got a good pitch. I was able to just say, hey, here's what he's been able to do, and it worked out. And that's where the analytics come in again. You don't tell him, oh, he's hit X, Y, 200, whatever on this, whatever. But it's nice when it works out. You're able to predict it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's still a question because I know the World Series, I want to say people really got upset about the analytics in
Oh
I think
yeah,
of the Rays, Dodgers, I want to say when they took some guys out. And there's been some moves in the past that have not worked out, but we'll see. Especially that's interesting on another debate to
yeah.
whole get into because that's where the analytics gets ruined in the postseason when it's short sample size as opposed to
Oh yeah.
long, and I guess like that's where it gets messed up. But kind of going off that tangent, I'll wrap things up here with a good question. What does your future, I guess, look like? I know a lot of it is unknown, especially in this industry,
Mhm.
but what are your plans and goals?
Well, I'll share one goal. Obviously, it's to work in professional sports. I've been blessed to be able to work in pro sports here at the minor league level with the Ice Hogs. But obviously, the goal is to be, on the mic every night, calling every minute of the action. While I do love being a broadcast assistant and working with Mike Folta, he's great. Absolutely, he's been uh, uh, an absolute addition to my toolbox. He gives me tools to work on, especially because I've never really worked in hockey outside of, college. But, the goal is to do professional baseball, whether that's indie league, minor league baseball. So there are applications around with my name around it around the United States right now, and in offices across baseball. But that's the goal. And, if, nothing else turns up, then I will be happy to return to Clinton. Clinton was the one place that gave me my big sort of like shot. Um, Especially with the market that Clinton has and the history of baseball. Talking to fans are like, yeah, we listen to you on the radio all the time. That was huge for me. Like I remember someone posted on Twitter, tagged me in it and said, hey, he listened to you out in Normal, Illinois, and I got a score sheet and I'm scoring the game with you. That was incredible. Like I was like, wow, people are actually listening. People actually care about their team, especially because they got kicked from minor league baseball. That was a moment and an experience I'll never forget, and I think you ask any big ball player or big time in Clinton is over, I will have nothing but great things to say about that town and the people and that team.
It's a great point to kind of wrap things up on. You mentioned too, just kind of the getting that feeling of like, I guess the butterflies in your stomach, knowing there's people getting out there. Because I can say when you're in the booth, you forget about like you're actually announcing like hundreds of
Yeah.
people. But I remember too, like obviously we have people on the stream listening on WVM and on the radio. And I remember my brother told me too when I was calling the Georgia Tech game, like, oh, they're playing their your game out there like in the concourse because you know how they always have the
Yeah.
radio. And I was like, oh, I thought they would have had Zagacki up there, but I guess
Yeah.
I'm broadcasting to another 60,000 who walked through. So there's
Yep.
kind of cool moments like that. And I don't have any other questions for you. I should ought to let you go here as we go on about a little over the announcer's hour as I try to make it. But again, everybody, thanks for Andres for joining us. I'll also get his info up on the screen to share that and check out what he's got going on. But I'm sure there's going to be a lot of success in your future, wherever that is going to be. So,
Thank you, Patrick. I'm sure we'll cross paths again on that on the journey that we're both going on. Thank you for having me on the announcers hour.
all right, yeah, no problem. Thanks again, and good luck going forward.
Thank you.